Vorak-7 had been a field medic for 32 years. 32 years of stitching wounds, setting fractures, administering blood replacement fluids to species from 40 different star systems. She had seen Krellian warriors weep like hatchlings when their exoskeletons cracked. She had watched Thuuvian diplomats faint dead away from a simple needle. She had once held the severed limb of a Dothraki mercenary while he screamed so loudly the ship's emergency klaxons activated by accident. Nothing, and she meant absolutely nothing, had prepared her for the human. His name was Petyr Okafor-Vance, and he had arrived on the medical deck of the Consortium vessel Endless Meridian the way most humans arrived anywhere, loudly, with a story that didn't quite add up and smelling faintly of something nobody could identify. The ship's manifest listed him as cultural liaison, which was the Consortium's polite way of saying he was someone who had made himself too useful to be classified and too difficult to be dismissed. He walked in, and yes, walked is the right word. Not limped, not shuffled, walked, holding his left arm at an angle that Vorak-7's medical scanner immediately flagged as wrong. Catastrophically wrong. 3 fractures along the radius, 1 complete snap at the ulnar process, and what the scanner cheerfully described as significant periosteal disruption across 4 load-bearing segments. In plain language, his forearm looked like someone had fed it through a cargo press and then tried to put it back together with good intentions and poor results. "Hello," he said, because of course that's how he opened. Not with screaming, not with a prayer to whatever gods humans maintained, which she understood were numerous and occasionally contradictory. Just hello, the way you'd greet someone at a food dispensary. Vorak-7 set down the dermal applicator she'd been cleaning and turned to face him fully. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the examination platform. "What happened? Cargo loader malfunction in Bay 6, Petyr said, dropping himself onto the platform with a casual ease that made her secondary eyelids flutter. The magnetic clamps released early and a crate, big one, full of Varun ore, so you know, dense, came down on the arm. I caught it for about 3 seconds before Emmett and Sura got the crane override running." "Pretty cool, actually." "Cool," she repeated. "Yeah." The crane save was really something. Emmett almost took out a support column trying to— "You are describing a Varuan ore crate," she said slowly, pulling up the cargo manifest on her tablet. "Bay 6, Item 7 on the load list. 740 kilograms. Petyr nodded agreeably. "Give or take. They round those numbers sometimes." Vorak-7 looked at the scanner. She looked at the human. She looked at the scanner again. The thing had not malfunctioned. She had run a secondary sweep the moment she saw the readout, because her first assumption was always equipment error. The scanner was fine. It was reporting, with complete mechanical honesty, that this creature had held up 740 kilograms on a forearm that now had the structural integrity of a dried twig, and had then walked, unassisted, down 2 decks to her medical bay, pausing apparently to tell Emmett and Sura that they'd done a good job with the crane. "Does it hurt?" she asked, because she was a professional, and professionals asked questions even when they are quietly questioning their career choices. "Oh, definitely," Petyr said. "Quite a bit, actually. I'd rate it a 7 out of 10. Out of 10. A Thuuvian diplomat had once given her an 8 out of 10 for a paper cut that had grazed his sensory filaments. She had prescribed him 3 days of rest and a mild analgesic, and he had written a formal letter of commendation for her compassionate care. She was going to need a moment. She began preparing the bone knit solution, a standard Consortium compound that accelerated calcium restructuring in most carbon-based species. The dosage calculations were simple enough. She had the human physiological profile on file from Petyr's intake forms, filed when he'd first come aboard 4 months ago. She had read those forms, she had thought she understood what they meant. She was beginning to suspect she had not. "This will take approximately 6 standard hours," she said, fitting the injection sleeve around his forearm and trying not to look directly at the angle of the break. "The compound will stabilize the fractures and begin calcified bridging. You'll need immobilization for the duration, and I'd recommend— 6 hours? He said it the way someone says it when they're mentally reorganizing a schedule, not the way someone says it while lying in agony on a medical platform. Is there a faster version? Vorak 7 paused. There is an accelerated protocol. It's considerably more uncomfortable. Most patients prefer the standard. Yeah, let's do the fast one, Petyr said. We've got the cargo review meeting at the 14th hour, and I told Captain Drevis I'd have the Bay 6 incident report finished before then. She stared at him. He looked back at her with the expression of a being who was simply trying to be efficient with his schedule, not the expression of a being whose forearm bones were currently arranged like a dropped puzzle. The accelerated protocol used a concentrated compound and low-frequency resonance stimulation to collapse the healing window from 6 hours to 90 minutes. It was used in battlefield triage under duress when there was no other option, because the process of forcing bone to restructure in real time, compressing hours of natural repair into minutes of aggressive biochemical coercion, produced a sensation that most patients described using words Vorak 7 did not allow in her medical bay. She had administered it 4 times in her career. Twice the patient had lost consciousness. Once, memorably, a Krellian warrior had bitten through the examination platform's safety rail. She set it up. She was not entirely sure why she didn't argue harder. There was something about the way Petyr Okafor-Vance occupied space, easy, unhurried, completely unconcerned with the objective reality of his situation, that made a certain terrible logic seem applicable. Maybe this would be fine. Maybe humans were different. Maybe she was about to learn something important about the species. Ready? She said. Go for it, he said, and picked up the tablet she'd left on the tray beside him, apparently intending to read something while this happened. She activated the resonance stimulator. For the first 40 seconds, Petyr read his tablet. She watched him. The scanner tracked the process in real time. She could see the fracture lines beginning to compress, the bone matrix responding to the compound, the cellular repair cascading through the damaged tissue faster than it had any biological right to. At the 45-second mark, he set the tablet down and took one long breath through his nose, slowly, deliberately. His jaw tightened, his free hand resting on his thigh curled very slightly at the fingers. That was it. That was the extent of the external response. At 60 seconds, she heard a sound. A low, organic crackling, like something being rearranged under pressure, which was precisely what was happening, and Petyr made a face. A brief one. The kind of face someone makes when they've bitten into something unexpectedly sour, not the kind of face that should accompany the live restructuring of 4 broken bones. He exhaled through his teeth. Okay, he said, conversationally. That's the part they mean. At 90 seconds, the stimulator completed its cycle. The scanner updated. She read the results twice. The fractures had bridged, not perfectly. There would be remodeling over the next several days, but structurally, functionally, the arm was intact. 90 minutes of repair, collapsed into 90 seconds, applied to an arm that by any rational metric should have been in traction for a week. Petyr looked at his forearm. He flexed his fingers once, then twice. He rotated the wrist slowly, testing the range of motion, nodding to himself the way a being does when checking work they're reasonably satisfied with. And then, and this was the part Vorak 7 would describe to colleagues for the next 11 years, the part that haunted her in the pleasant, bewildering way that truly unexplainable things tend to haunt you. He smiled, not a pained smile, not a relieved smile, just a smile. Comfortable, easy, the smile of someone who had just experienced something mildly challenging and found it acceptable. Good as new, he said, mostly. Vorak 7's tool tray hit the floor. She had not intended to drop it. Her grip had simply failed to maintain priority when her brain directed all available processing toward understanding what she had just witnessed. The dermal applicator, the calibration stylus, the secondary scanner probe, and a small container of sterile swabs made a tremendous collective clatter on the deck plating, and Petyr Okafor-Vance looked down at them and then back up at her with a mildly concerned expression. "You okay?" he asked. She was a 32-year veteran of Consortium medical service. She had a certification wall in her quarters that required 2 separate panels. She had, on one occasion, performed an emergency organ stabilization on a Urathi commander while the ship was actively evading missile fire, and she had not dropped a single tool during the entire procedure. "Fine," she said. "I'm fine." She was not, clinically speaking, fine. She picked up her tools. She did this carefully, methodically, one at a time, because the act of retrieving scattered equipment gave her hands something to do while her mind conducted a small internal emergency meeting about the state of her professional worldview. Petyr Okafor-Vance watched her do this with the patient, undemanding attention of someone who had nowhere pressing to be for the next 4 minutes. He had rolled his sleeve back down over the arm. The arm that had, 20 minutes ago, resembled a structural failure report, and now apparently functioned well enough for its owner to be thinking about cargo manifests. "You've never treated a human before," he said. It wasn't a question. "I have treated humans," Vorak-7 said, with as much professional dignity as a person crouching on the floor collecting swabs could manage. 3, prior to this. "How'd those go?" She stood up. She set the tray back on its stand. She looked at him with the measured, evaluating gaze she had spent 3 decades perfecting. One had a laceration on the hand. Standard closure. He was pleasant. The second had a respiratory infection. Standard antibiotic equivalent, resolved in 2 days. The third had a sprained ankle. She paused. He complained considerably. Petyr nodded sympathetically. "Sprains are annoying," he complained, she said carefully. "More than you did about the sprain. More than you did about this." She gestured at his arm with a precision that implied the gesture carried formal medical weight. Petyr considered this. "Different people have different tolerances," he offered, in the generous, non-judgmental tone of a being who was being very diplomatic about the fact that some of his species apparently lose composure over joint inflammation, while he himself had just done what he had just done. Vorak-7 sat down on her own stool and crossed her secondary arms over her primary ones, which in her species was the physiological equivalent of needing a moment. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Medically." "Sure. Does your species experience pain?" It came out less like a question and more like a statement she was testing for structural integrity. Petyr tilted his head slightly. "Yes, definitely. I told you, that was a 7, and the accelerated protocol. 8, maybe 8.5, he said, with the air of someone being precise because accuracy matters. Toward the end, 8.5. The Krellian warrior who had bitten through her safety rail had given that experience a 9, and he had been considered, among his people, to have an exceptionally high pain threshold. It was why they sent him into situations that produced the need for triage in the first place. "You read a tablet," she said. "I was trying to get through the incident report before the meeting," he said reasonably. "During the first portion of the accelerated bone-knit protocol." "Well, I figured the first part wouldn't be the bad part," he said. "Usually with these things the bad part comes later." I was right, mostly. Vorak-7 thought about the word mostly and decided not to pull on that thread yet. She had a career's worth of clinical composure, and she intended to spend it wisely. "I would like to run a full physiological assessment," she said, "while you're here, with your consent." Petyr shrugged with the arm that had been broken. He shrugged with it. "Fine by me, just the incident report. I will have you finished before the 14th hour, she said firmly. He seemed satisfied. He settled back on the platform with the easy comfort of someone who found medical examinations mildly interesting rather than threatening, which was, she was increasingly finding, precisely the kind of low-level wrongness that defined interacting with this particular human. She ran the full panel. It took 40 minutes. Halfway through, she called her colleague Dr. Fen Osulai down from the research deck on the pretense of needing a second opinion on some ambiguous scan data, which was true technically, in the sense that she needed a witness who would confirm she was reading the outputs correctly and had not suffered some kind of professional break from reality. Fen Osulai was a Doraki physician with 38 years of experience, 2 doctorates, and a temperament so unflappable that he had once calmly continued a patient consultation while the ship's gravity plating failed and everyone in the room began floating gently toward the ceiling. He arrived, reviewed the scan results Vorak-7 handed him without comment, and then stood very still for a period of time that was slightly too long to be casual. "This is the patient?" he asked. "Sitting right there," Vorak-7 said. Petyr waved from the examination platform. Fen looked at the scans again. He pulled up the historical panel, showing the pre-treatment state of the arm versus the current readings. He made a sound that in Dothraki physiology indicated the specific cognitive state of encountering data that the brain was processing but not yet accepting. "The density readings," he said. "Yes," said Vorak-7. "The cortical thickness." "Yes." "The pain response markers in the neural." "Yes." Fen set the tablet down and looked at Petyr Okafor-Vance with the expression of a being who was re-evaluating something he had previously considered settled. "How long have humans had these characteristics?" he asked. Petyr blinked. "I mean, always. As far as I know. It's not really something we track the start date of." "Your bone density," Fen said, and there was something reverential working its way into his clinical tone despite obvious efforts to prevent it, "is approximately 40% above the standard baseline for carbon-based bipedal species of your mass range. We evolved on a high-gravity planet," Petyr said, like this was a reasonable and sufficient explanation for everything, which it was not, because the scans showed things that gravity alone did not account for, and both physicians in the room knew it. "Your inflammatory response," Vorak-7 said, taking up the thread, "is suppressed to a degree that in most species would indicate a serious immune dysfunction. In your case, the rest of your immune panel is," she searched for the word, "aggressive." "Enthusiastic," Fen offered. "Enthusiastic," she agreed. "Your body appears to be in a state of continuous low-level repair, not healing from anything specific, simply maintaining, constantly." Petyr looked thoughtful. "Is that bad?" "It's extraordinary," Fen said, and there was no pretense of clinical neutrality left in it at all. Petyr seemed genuinely uncertain how to respond to being called extraordinary by two experienced physicians who looked like they were having a quiet crisis. He settled on, "Thanks, I guess." Vorak-7 pulled up one more panel. She had saved this one because she wanted Fen present when she presented it. It was the neural response mapping from the accelerated protocol, the recording of Petyr's actual brain activity during the procedure, laid over the standard expected response curve for the compound and stimulation intensity used. The expected curve looked like a mountain range. Steep peaks across the pain processing regions, sharp activation in the distress response centers, the unmistakable neural signature of a body comprehensively informing its owner that something terrible was happening and immediate action was required. Petyr's actual response curve looked like gentle hills. Not because the signals weren't there. They were. She'd verified that 3 times. The pain receptors had fired. The data had transmitted correctly through the nervous system. The brain had received accurate information about the state of the arm. The signals had arrived. They had simply been managed, not suppressed by any compound she'd administered, not masked by shock or adrenaline at unusual levels, just handled, processed and filed into a category labeled something like tolerable for now. Moving on. Fen looked at the comparison chart for a long time, then he said, very quietly, "They do this voluntarily, the soldiers." It wasn't directed at Petyr. It was the kind of thing someone says when a larger picture has just assembled itself in their mind, and they need to hear it aloud to be sure it's real. Because here was the thing about the humans. Not just Petyr Okafor-Vance with his cargo crate arm and his meeting schedule and his tablet reading, but all of them, the ones who showed up in history files and diplomatic briefings and the occasional alarming combat report. They had not been engineered for this. No Consortium species selection program, no targeted genetic optimization, no millennia of careful cultivation had produced what the scans were currently displaying. This was just what they were. What evolution and circumstance and apparently sheer stubbornness had made them, on a single medium-sized world, that most of the galaxy hadn't thought particularly significant until the humans themselves started showing up and making everyone reconsider their threat assessment rubrics. "I should probably get to that meeting," Petyr said. Vorak 7 looked at him. He was sitting on her examination platform, which was designed for patients, beings who were here because something was wrong, beings who needed care and treatment, and the structured compassion of medical intervention. And he looked for all the world like someone who had just stopped by to check in and found the experience mildly interesting. "You fractured 4 bones today," she said. "3 fractures and 1 complete break," he said. And she realized with a small, vertiginous shock that he was correcting her using her own scan results, which he had apparently been reading upside down from the platform while she was reviewing them. The ulnar was a clean snap. The radius had 3 fracture points, not 4. The scanner report is pretty clear. She did not have a response to this. Fen made a very small sound beside her that she recognized as the Dothraki equivalent of an involuntary laugh, being suppressed under emergency conditions. "You're cleared," she said. "Come back in 48 hours for a follow-up density check. And if you experience any numbness in the fingers, I'll come straight here," he said, hopping off the platform in a single easy motion and landing on both feet, which, given that his boots made a solid sound on the deck plating, reminded her that the bone density readings hadn't been a scanner artifact. "Thanks, Dr. Vorak 7. You're very good at this." She accepted the compliment with a nod that she hoped looked professional. He left. The door slid shut behind him. Fen Osolai, 38 years of experience, 2 doctorates, unflappable survivor of zero-gravity patient consultations, picked up the scan results and looked at them one more time. Then he said, "I'm going to need to revise the xenophysiology module I teach to the junior staff. The section on human pain tolerance," Vorak 7 said. "The entire human section," Fen said. He set the scans down. "I had it listed under moderate durability species. Between the Thuvians and the Urathi." Vorak 7 thought about Petyr Okafor-Vance reading a cargo report while his bones were being restructured by accelerated biochemical force. She thought about the smile, that easy, uncomplicated smile, the one that said 8.5 out of 10 and also, incidentally, "Where do I need to be next?" "Move it," she said. "To where?" She thought about it for a moment. She thought about the neural response chart with its gentle hills where mountains should have been. She thought about 740 kilograms caught for 3 seconds and a being who filed that under the same category as an annoying afternoon. She thought about a species that had looked at a hostile universe and apparently decided, somewhere deep in its collective history, that the correct response was to simply absorb whatever the universe offered and then ask what was next on the schedule. "Make a new category," she said. "Put them at the top." Fen considered this with the gravity it deserved. Then he picked up his notes, tucked the scan results under his arm, and headed for the door. He paused at the threshold. "Do you think he knows?" he asked. "That it's remarkable? Do you think any of them actually know what they are?" Vorak 7 thought about the way Petyr had said "cool," talking about the crane save that had happened after the crate came down. She thought about his genuine confusion at being called extraordinary. She thought about the first question he'd asked her, which had not been about his arm at all, but about whether the meeting could be accommodated. "No," she said. "I don't think they have any idea." Fen made the sound again, the suppressed laugh, less suppressed this time. "That," he said, "might be the most alarming part." The door closed. Vorak 7 sat alone in her medical bay, surrounded by clean equipment and a tool tray she had picked up off the floor, and she pulled up Petyr Okafor-Vance's patient file to write the incident notes. In the summary field, she typed, "Patient presented with compound forearm fractures following industrial accident. Treated with accelerated bone knit protocol. Patient tolerated procedure without complication." She stared at the word "tolerated" for a long moment. Then she added, "Recommend comprehensive review of human physiological classification across all Consortium medical databases. Current parameters are insufficient." She saved the file. She sat back. Through the viewport beside her station, The stars moved slowly past, ancient and vast, and entirely unconcerned with the recalibration happening in one small medical bay on one ship among billions, where a physician had just learned something she suspected could not be unlearned. Somewhere above her, on the cargo deck, Petyr Okafor-Vance was probably already writing his incident report, with both hands.